The sirens came first, sharp, panicked, slicing through the cold Colorado night like a warning no one could outrun. Red and blue lights tore across the desert highway, bouncing off rock and steel, chasing a black SUV that refused to slow down. Inside the vehicle, the man behind the wheel kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, hands steady despite the chaos behind him. He knew where this road ended. Everyone did. ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, a place whispered about in courtrooms and newsrooms, spoken of in half sentences by men who had already accepted their fate, a prison not designed to rehabilitate but to erase. When the SUV finally skidded to a stop, boxed in by armed vehicles, the man didn't run. He stepped out calmly, raised his hands, and looked toward the dark outline of the mountains. Later, an officer would say his expression wasn't fear, it was relief. That moment marked the end of one story, and the beginning of another that no one outside ADX Florence was ever supposed to hear. 3 months earlier, the first body was found. It was discovered in an abandoned rail tunnel outside Denver, wrapped in industrial plastic, positioned with unsettling precision. No struggle, no fingerprints, no weapon left behind. Just a symbol carved into the concrete wall nearby, clean, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. Detective Aaron Cole stood at the scene, staring at the symbol longer than he should have. He'd seen it before, not on the streets, not in a gang file, but in a sealed federal case from years ago, one that ended quietly, with a closed courtroom and a transfer order stamped in red. ADX Florence. The victim was identified as Daniel Mercer, a former federal contractor who had vanished from public records 5 years earlier. Officially, Mercer didn't exist anymore, and officially, someone had wanted him found. As Cole dug deeper, the pattern emerged fast. Mercer wasn't the first to disappear. He was just the first to be discovered. The trail led back to a name buried in classified documents: Evan Rourke. Rourke was a former intelligence analyst turned domestic terrorist facilitator, a man who never pulled a trigger but always knew where the bullets would land. He was convicted in a closed trial, sentenced to life, and transferred to ADX Florence under conditions so strict even his lawyers couldn't speak openly about them. Rourke was supposed to be cut off from the world, but the symbol in the tunnel said otherwise. Cole requested access to Rourke's prison file. What he received instead was a warning. ADX inmates don't communicate, a federal liaison told him flatly. They don't organize. They don't reach out. That's Cole didn't argue. He just asked one question. Then why are people connected to Rourke dying now? Inside ADX Florence, time moved differently. Inmate cell D17 was a concrete box barely larger than a parking space, 23 hours a day. Evan Rourke sat alone, eating alone, thinking alone. No windows, no voices, no human touch. Even the guards were shadow silent, faceless, efficient. Yet somehow information was moving. During routine monitoring, prison analysts noticed subtle irregularities. Inmates adjusting routines in sync, guards reporting identical, cryptic interactions. Requests filed with precise timing, never overlapping, never raising alarms on their own. Individually, it meant nothing. Together, it was choreography. Rourke never broke rules. That was the most disturbing part. He followed them perfectly, so perfectly it began to look intentional. When Cole finally secured permission to observe Rourke through reinforced glass, he expected defiance, or hatred, or at least acknowledgement. Rourke did none of that. He sat calmly, eyes forward, hands folded, as if he'd been waiting. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost polite. "You're late, Detective." Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Outside the prison, the bodies kept appearing. A journalist, a former corrections officer, a defense attorney who had once represented an unnamed federal client. Each death followed the same pattern: no evidence, no witnesses, the same symbol left behind like a signature. The media called it coincidence. Cole called it control. As pressure mounted, federal authorities rushed to contain the narrative. Leaks were sealed, files disappeared, and then someone close to the investigation vanished. Agent Marissa Hale. She had been the one pushing hardest for a full audit of ADX Florence's internal systems. The last message on her phone was a single line sent to Cole at 2:14 a.m. It's not just one inmate. Her car was found abandoned near the prison perimeter. No sign of a struggle. No sign of hail. Only the symbol etched into the dust on the driver's side door. Cole demanded answers. What he got instead was a restricted access file marked Post-Sentence Influence Assessment. The document detailed a terrifying possibility: certain inmates at ADX Florence were being used unofficial. Why as sources of strategic insight, not through direct communication, but through patterns, behavior modeling, and controlled exposure to select personnel. The system assumed isolation meant silence. It was wrong. Rourke wasn't commanding from the shadows. He was predicting, manipulating probability, exploiting human weakness, turning isolation into a weapon. And someone with access was helping him. The final piece came late one night, when a junior analyst flagged an anomaly in ADX Florence's maintenance logs. A service corridor beneath cell block D, sealed for over a decade, had registered electronic activity. No authorization, no personnel record, just a door that should never have opened. Cole and a federal response team arrived at the prison before dawn. They moved fast, bypassing protocols, descending into the concrete arteries beneath the facility. The corridor smelled of dust and metal. The lights flickered as they reached the sealed door. It was unlocked when they pulled it open. Their flashlights swept across a small room hidden behind the prison's design walls, covered in markings, schedules, names, and symbols, and in the center of it all was a single message, written neatly across the concrete wall: isolation doesn't break minds, it perfects them. But the most horrifying part wasn't the message. It was the realization that Evan Rourke hadn't built this alone, and whatever was coming next had already been set in motion. Because when they checked the inmate registry that morning, one name was missing. The first thing Detective Aaron Cole noticed when he stepped inside ADX Florence was the silence. Not quiet silence, the kind that pressed against the ears, thick and deliberate, as if the building itself were listening. Every footstep echoed once and then vanished, swallowed by reinforced concrete and layers of steel. No shouting, no distant voices, no reminders that human beings were stacked inside this fortress of isolation. This was not a prison, it was a containment system. Cole followed the warden down a corridor lit by cold white lights. Massive doors lined the walls, each one sealed, numbered, and watched by cameras that never blinked. Somewhere behind one of those doors sat Evan Rourke, the man whose shadow seemed to stretch far beyond these walls. Everything here is controlled, the warden said without turning back. Movement, meals, airflow, sound. ADX doesn't allow surprises. Cole almost laughed at that, because surprises were already piling up. Agent Marissa Hale was officially listed as missing, and officially, her name had vanished from active databases within 48 hours of her disappearance. Her access logs were scrubbed, her emails flagged and sealed. Someone had moved fast and with authority. Cole reviewed the last footage of Hale entering ADX Florence. She walked through security calm and focused, carrying a slim folder marked Infrastructure Review. She never exited, according to the logs. She left the facility at 6:12 p.m., according to the cameras. She didn't He wore the standard beige uniform, but it looked almost ceremonial on him, like a costume he'd long since mastered. Rourke smiled faintly. Cole leaned forward. People connected to you are dead, others are missing, and every trail leads back here. Rourke tilted his head. And yet, here I am, still inside my box, still alone. He glanced around the cell, as if admiring it. Tell me, detective, do you really believe isolation means disconnection? That night, A corrections officer named Thomas Reeve didn't show up for his shift. Reeve had worked ADX Florence for 11 years. No disciplinary issues. No missed days. He knew the rhythms of the prison like muscle memory. When he failed to check in, supervisors assumed an emergency. They found his car parked at a rest stop 15 miles from the facility. The engine was cold. His phone sat on the passenger seat, screen cracked and locked. The last message on it was unsent. "I think I made a mistake." Reeve's body was discovered hours later in a dry ravine. No visible trauma. No weapon. Just that same symbol carved into a flat stone beside him. The pattern was accelerating. And Cole realized something worse than murder was happening. Someone was cleaning house. Deep inside ADX Florence, systems analysts flagged a breach not external, but internal. Maintenance access points had been used outside scheduled windows. Camera feeds looped for seconds at a time. Never long enough to raise automated alerts, but long enough for someone to move and scene. This wasn't a riot. It wasn't chaos. It was precision. Cole demanded a full lockdown of cell block D. The request was denied. Instead, he was handed a classified briefing marked "Do Not Duplicate." The document outlined a covert federal program initiated years earlier. Certain high-risk inmates, strategic thinkers, manipulators, architects of large-scale crime had been quietly studied. Their behavioral patterns were analyzed to predict extremist networks, financial crime structures, even insurgent tactics. They were never supposed to influence outcomes. They were only supposed to be observed. But observation, Cole realized, is never passive. Someone had crossed the line from study to collaboration, and Evan Rourke had become indispensable. Cole returned to the interview room. This time, Rourke spoke first. "They're afraid now," he said calmly. "That's when mistakes happen. You don't leave this cell," Cole snapped. "You don't talk to anyone. Explain how bodies are dropping outside these walls." Rourke leaned closer to the glass. "I don't give orders," he said softly. "I provide clarity. People act on clarity." Cole's fists clenched. "You use them." "No," Rourke replied. "They used me. The difference matters." Rourke's eyes flicked upward toward a camera Cole hadn't noticed before. "Ask yourself this," Rourke continued. "If a system designed to erase men suddenly needs one to function, who's really in control?" Answer came too fast. A fire alarm triggered in a non-operational wing of the prison. Protocols kicked in. Doors sealed. Power routed. For 90 seconds, ADX Florence wasn't blind, but it was distracted. When control was restored, 3 things were missing: 1 maintenance worker, 1 classified server drive, and 1 inmate. Transfer order signed, and logged, and dated for that very night. The name on the order made Cole's blood run cold. Evan Rourke. But Rourke was still in his cell, which meant the transfer wasn't about moving him. It was about moving someone else. Someone no one knew existed. Cole finally gained access to the sealed service corridor beneath. Cell Block D, the same corridor Agent Hale had been investigating. The walls were lined with outdated wiring, abandoned control panels, and evidence of recent use. Footprints, fresh. At the end of the corridor was a reinforced door, half open. Inside, Cole found a small holding room, a chair, restraints, and a federal badge lying on the floor. Marissa Hale's badge. Behind the chair, carved deeply into the concrete, was a message written with methodical care. The system needed a sacrifice. Cole stood frozen, heart pounding, because he finally understood the truth. ADX Florence wasn't just holding monsters, it was creating leverage. And whatever deal had been made inside this prison was far from over, as alarms began to echo through the facility once more. Cole realized the most dangerous phase of the case had just begun. It was how many people were willing to help him do it. Evan Rourke remained in cell D17. Officially, and officially, his name was removed from active monitoring lists. He's neutralized, the report concluded. Cole didn't believe a word of it. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Colorado, burying the mountains in white and muting the world outside the prison walls. Cole tried to move on: new cases, new faces, familiar crimes that fit inside ordinary boxes. Then a body was found in rural Montana. A former intelligence consultant, retired, off the radar. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, and carved into the wood of the cabin door, deep enough to last decades, was a symbol Cole recognized instantly. The same one. Cole stared at the photo long after the briefing ended, because Evan Rourke hadn't spoken to anyone in months, because ADX Florence reported no irregularities, because isolation, according to every rule ever written, should have made this impossible. Cole drove back to Florence without authorization. The warden met him at the gate, tension written across his face. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," Cole said. "That's why I am." They walked the corridors in silence until they reached cell D17. The door stood closed, secure, intact. The warden hesitated, then nodded. The door opened. The cell was empty. No broken locks, no damaged hinges. The bed was neatly made. The floor spotless. On the concrete wall, written in clean, deliberate handwriting, was a final message. A second line sat beneath it. "You were always part of the experiment." Cole felt the air leave his lungs. Evan Rourke hadn't escaped. He had been moved. The case was sealed within hours. Media coverage vanished. Files were locked. ADX Florence returned to myth and rumor, its true purpose buried beneath layers of classification. Cole resigned 3 weeks later. He still checks the news every morning. Still watches for patterns. Still waits for the next symbol to appear. Because somewhere, beyond the reach of cells and concrete, a man who was never supposed to leave learned the one truth no prison can contain. That absolute isolation doesn't end influence. It refines it. And if you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. So don't blink. Because some prisons never let you go even when the door is open.